The first rifle shot cracked across the frozen valley so sharply it felt like the mountain itself had split open. "Contact East Ridge!" someone shouted over the radio, their voice tearing through the static. A storm of bullets followed. Snow burst into the air around the patrol as rounds slammed into the rocks and frozen ground beside them. 12 soldiers dropped instantly into cover, scrambling for any protection along the narrow mountain pass. The valley amplified every sound, rifle fire echoing off the cliffs, boots sliding across ice, someone shouting coordinates over the chaos. But something about the scene was wrong. I wasn't there. 2 hours earlier, Commander Captain Laura Whitaker had looked me straight in the eye and pulled me off the operation. Mess Staff Sergeant Madison Carter Knee Staff Sergeant Madison Carter, the sniper every one of those soldiers trusted to watch their backs. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply gave the order in a calm voice that made the room fall silent. "You're off this operation." Now the squad I had trained beside for weeks was moving blind through Black Ridge Corridor, a valley every soldier on that base feared. The steep ridgelines on both sides were perfect for an ambush. Anyone controlling the high ground could trap a team in seconds. From the base radio room, I heard everything. Gunfire tearing through the comms. Someone yelling for cover, a medic screaming for pressure on a wound. Then the words that freeze every soldier's blood. "Troops in contact." My chest tightened as the radio filled with overlapping voices and rifle fire. I could already picture the terrain in my mind, the rocks, the ridges, the angles of fire, because I had seen this exact ambush before. 2 years earlier. Same valley, same trap. 3 soldiers died that day because I hesitated for half a second. Sergeant Tyler Brooks, Corporal David Kim, Private Noah Lang. Good men who trusted me to stop the threat before it reached them. I still hear that moment in my sleep, still see the muzzle flash I should have stopped first. But as the radio crackled with panic and gunfire, one thing became clear. This time would be different, because this time I wasn't going to freeze. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? 2 weeks earlier, the mission looked flawless on paper. Our forward operating base sat against the edge of a frozen mountain range where the wind never truly stopped. It moved constantly through the wire fences and steel containers, rattling loose metal and carrying the smell of diesel and cold iron across the compound. At night, the temperature dropped so low the snow hardened into a glassy crust. Every footstep across it cracked like shattered ice. Most soldiers hated that sound. To me, it was just another detail to memorize, because details keep people alive. Our unit had one objective: escort a reconnaissance element through Black Ridge Corridor *. On satellite imagery, the corridor looked like nothing more than a thin valley cutting to the mountains, just another route between ridge lines. But anyone who had spent more than a week at that base knew the truth. Black Ridge wasn't a road, it was a funnel. The cliffs on both sides climbed almost straight up, forming natural sniper perches across the ridge lines. The valley floor narrowed in places until an entire squad had to move single file. Radio signals bounced unpredictably between the rocks, creating dead zones that could swallow communications in seconds. If an enemy unit controlled the high ground, a patrol moving through that valley would have almost no chance of escaping, which was why the mission depended on one thing: my rifle. For 8 years, I had served as a sniper in the Army, and every soldier on that base knew exactly what my job meant. When a patrol moved through dangerous terrain, I went above them, finding the highest vantage point, the clearest line of sight, the place where one rifle could quietly dominate an entire battlefield. From there, I watched everything: movement in the rocks, reflections from a scope, a shadow shifting where it shouldn't. Sometimes the enemy never even knew they had been seen before the shot arrived. That was the kind of overwatch Black Ridge required. The plan was simple. Before the patrol entered the valley, I would climb to an elevated observation point nearly 700 meters above the corridor. From that ridge, I could scan both slopes of the valley with my scope and eliminate any threat before it reached the team below. Clean, precise, controlled. Exactly the kind of mission snipers train for. At least, that's how it should have been. But during the final week of preparation, small things began to change. At first, it was so subtle most people wouldn't have noticed, except asterisk specialist Elena Cruz. Elena was our communications specialist, and she had the sharpest eyes in the unit. During a training drill one afternoon, she stood beside me while I adjusted my scope after a simulated engagement. That was when she saw it. My hand trembled. Not much, just a faint, almost invisible shake in my left hand as I steadied the rifle. Most people would have missed it completely. Elena didn't. She didn't say anything in that moment. She just watched quietly, her brow tightening slightly before she turned back to her radio console. But once someone notices something like that, they start noticing other things too, like the fact that I wasn't sleeping, or at least not much. Most nights, long after the barracks lights had gone dark and the base fell quiet, I stayed inside the armory, cleaning my rifle, rechecking my ammunition, adjusting gear that had already been perfectly arranged hours earlier. Sometimes I would disassemble the rifle completely and rebuild it piece by piece, even though there was nothing wrong with it. I told people it helped me focus. The truth was simpler. I was trying to stay awake, because every time I closed my eyes, the same memory came back. 2 years earlier, same valley, same mountains, same frozen silence before the shooting started. We had moved into Black Ridge just after sunrise that day. I had climbed to a ridge position almost identical to the one planned for this mission. From there, I watched the patrol move through the valley below, just like I had done dozens of times before. Everything looked clear, until it wasn't. The enemy sniper fired first. I still remember the sound of that shot echoing through the mountains. And the half second that followed, half a second where my mind hesitated, half a second where I searched the ridgeline for the shooter, half a second where my finger didn't move. That was all it took. By the time I found him in my scope and returned fire, 3 soldiers were already down. Asterisk Sergeant Tyler Brooks. Asterisk Corporal David Kim. Asterisk Private Noah Lang. Asterisk Private Noah Lang. Men who had trusted me to watch the ridges and keep them safe. Men who died because my rifle spoke second instead of first. Ever since that day, I carried something inside my chest that never fully went away. A quiet doubt that followed me through every training exercise, every mission briefing, every moment I lifted a rifle to my shoulder. I never said it out loud, but the thought was always there. Maybe I wasn't the sniper everyone believed I was. Maybe that perfect record people talked about was just luck that hadn't run out yet. Most of the team never noticed, but one person did. Commander, asterisk, Captain Laura Whitaker. What I didn't know then was that she had already seen the truths written in my own handwriting. Late one night, weeks earlier, she had opened the small notebook I kept locked inside my gear case, my private journal. Inside it, between mission notes and range calculations, was a single sentence I had written after another sleepless night. A sentence that explained everything. If I go back into that valley broken, I'll break everyone with me. And when Commander Whitaker read those words, she made a decision that would change the entire mission. The morning of deployment arrived wrapped in a cold that felt almost unnatural. The mountains were silent, the sky still black, and the wind carried thin sheets of frozen snow across the base like drifting smoke. At 0400, 12 soldiers gathered inside the operations tent for the final briefing. The space smelled of coffee, canvas, and cold air leaking through the seams of the structure. A large tactical map covered the center table, pinned down at the corners by metal flashlights and folded gloves. Above it, a projector cast satellite imagery of asterisk Black Ridge Corridor S-Chorus, a white board. The valley looked narrow from above, too narrow. Commander asterisk Captain Laura Whitaker asterisk stood at the front of the room, arms folded behind her back. She had the calm posture of someone who had spent years making hard decisions in rooms just like this one. Nothing about her expression revealed tension, fear, or doubt. But something about the way she looked at me felt different. Her eyes lingered for a second longer than usual, almost like she was measuring something. Sergeant First Class asterisk Daniel Mercer stood beside the map, explaining the final movement plan. Mercer had led patrols through hostile terrain for more than a decade. His voice carried the quiet authority that came from experience. Recon team enters the corridor here, he said, tapping the map with a gloved finger. Carter establishes overwatch on this ridgeline before we move. Once she confirms the high ground is clear, the patrol pushes through the valley floor. Every soldier in the tent understood the logic. Without overwatch from above, the valley was nothing more than a shooting gallery waiting to happen. The briefing moved quickly, radio frequencies were confirmed, extraction routes reviewed, weather conditions discussed. Everything felt routine, controlled, until Commander Whitaker spoke. Before we finalize deployment, she said quietly, there's one change to the roster. The room grew still. She looked directly at me. Staff Sergeant Carter, you're not deploying with this unit. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the air inside the tent had frozen. Then Mercer pushed himself upright so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. What? Whitaker didn't raise her voice. Her tone stayed steady. You're off the mission. That was it. No explanation, no explanation, no elaboration. Just the order. Mercer stared at her like he had misheard. Ma'am, with respect, that doesn't make sense. He gestured toward the map. This operation was designed around Carter's overwatch position. Without a sniper covering those ridges, this patrol is exposed the entire time. Several other soldiers shifted uneasily. Everyone in that room knew the same thing Mercer did. Black Ridge Corridor, without a sniper watching the high ground, was suicide. Whitaker's expression didn't change. The decision is final. Mercer's jaw tightened. Ma'am, that valley is an ambush zone. You take Carter off this mission, you're sending 12 soldiers into a kill funnel without eyes on the ridgelines. The tension in the tent thickened. But Whitaker didn't argue. She simply turned her gaze back toward me. Staff Sergeant Carter, she said calmly, step outside. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward me. The silence felt heavy. I could feel Mercer waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to challenge the order, waiting for me to say what everyone else in that tent was thinking. That the mission needed a sniper, that the patrol depended on me, that removing me from the operation made no tactical sense at all. But the words never came, because deep down, somewhere beneath the confusion and the tension, I already understood something the others didn't. I pushed my chair back slowly. Then I stood. The fabric of my combat jacket rustled quietly as I came to attention. Yes, ma'am, I said. I raised my hand in a clean, professional salute. Whitaker returned it without hesitation. Then I turned and walked toward the tent entrance. Behind me, the reaction came instantly. Mercer's voice rose. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're gambling with this entire patrol. Another soldier muttered something under his breath. Someone else slammed a hand against the edge of the table. The room erupted into argument the moment the flap of the tent closed behind me, but outside, everything was quiet. The cold air hit my face as I stepped into the darkness of the early morning. Snow crunched beneath my boots. The mountains stretched out in every direction, silent and indifferent. Inside the tent, the voices of my team continued rising in frustration, but inside my chest, there was only silence. Because a part of me already knew exactly why Commander Whitaker had made that decision, and a deeper part of me feared she might be right. 2 hours later, the patrol moved out without me. 12 soldiers stepped through the outer gate of the base and disappeared into the frozen mountains, their figures fading slowly into the gray horizon. The wind carried the sound of their boots across the hard snow, sharp and rhythmic, until even that vanished into the distance. I watched them go from the communications room window. The rifle that should have been on my shoulder rested silently against the wall beside me. Black Ridge Corridor waited somewhere beyond those mountains, quiet and deceptive. From a distance, it looked almost peaceful, like any other winter valley carved between steep cliffs. But I knew better. That valley was a funnel, and funnels were built for traps. Exactly 40 minutes after the patrol entered the corridor, the first shot rang through the radio. A burst of static exploded across the speaker. Then someone shouted, "Contact East Ridge!" The next few seconds dissolved into chaos. Gunfire erupted through the transmission, sharp cracks echoing across the mountains as rounds snapped past microphones and helmets. The radio operator beside me instinctively turned the volume higher, and suddenly the entire room filled with overlapping voices. Multiple shooters. Take cover. Jennings is hit. My body went rigid. The sounds alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a random firefight, it was an ambush, a well-planned one. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves across three separate ridgelines overlooking the valley. From those heights, they could fire down into the corridor from multiple directions at once. Crossfire, high ground, limited escape routes. The formation was perfect. My stomach dropped, because it was the exact same trap I had seen before, 2 years earlier, in the same valley. My hands tightened around the edge of the radio desk as another burst of gunfire crackled through the speakers. Mercer, we got movement on the western ridge. Negative second shooter, north side. Jennings is down. Repeat, Jennings is down. The medic's voice cut through the chaos. I'm on him. I need cover. I closed my eyes for a second, and instantly the terrain appeared in my mind. Every ridgeline, every rock formation, every blind angle along the valley floor. Black Ridge had lived inside my memory ever since that day. I knew exactly where the shooters would be positioned. The eastern ridge provided the best elevation. The northern rock shelf offered perfect concealment, and the narrow bend halfway through the corridor created a natural choke point where soldiers could be trapped with nowhere to run. The enemy hadn't chosen those positions by accident. They were controlling the battlefield from above, exactly where a sniper should have been stopping them, exactly where I should have been. Another burst of gunfire tore through the radio. Bradley, move left. Negative, we're pinned. Mercer, we can't push forward. My chest tightened. I could hear the strain in Sergeant First Class Daniel Mercer's voice as he tried to keep the team coordinated under fire. Everyone hold positions, return fire when you see muzzle flash. But that was the problem. They couldn't see the shooters. Not clearly. From the valley floor, the enemy had the advantage. The ridgelines hid their exact locations, leaving the patrol firing into shadows and echoes. Without someone controlling the high ground, they were fighting blind. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was weaker. Medic, the word cut off in a burst of static. My fingers dug into the metal edge of the desk. Commander Whitaker's voice echoed in my memory. You're off the mission. At the time, the order had felt impossible to understand. Now, listening to the firefight unfold through the speakers, it felt even worse. Because every instinct inside me screamed the same thing. I knew this battlefield. I knew these angles. I knew exactly where those enemy shooters were hiding. But I wasn't there. Another voice broke through the chaos. Mercer, they've got the ridge locked down. The words sent a cold wave through my chest. That meant the patrol had already reached the choke point, the worst section of the valley. If the enemy controlled the ridges above them now, the team had almost no way out. The radio exploded again. Medic! We need a medic! Someone was shouting coordinates. Another soldier yelled for suppressive fire. Bullets cracked so loudly through the transmission it sounded like they were hitting the walls of the room around me, and suddenly, the truth hit me like a punch to the lungs. This wasn't just another ambush. They were walking directly into the same kill zone that had destroyed my last team. Same valley, same ridges, same deadly geometry of fire. For a moment the memories crashed back so violently my vision blurred. I could almost see it again, the muzzle flash from the ridge, the half-second hesitation, the bodies falling in the snow. Sergeant Tyler Brooks, Corporal David Kim, Private Noah Lang. My breathing slowed as I forced myself to focus on the radio again. More gunfire, more shouting, more confusion, and beneath all of it, one terrifying reality. If someone didn't stop those shooters on the ridge, none of them were getting out of that valley alive. The moment that changed everything came through the radio. Troops in contact. The words slammed into my chest like a physical blow. For a second, the world around me disappeared. All I could hear was the echo of gunfire through the speakers and the sudden rush of memories forcing their way back into my mind. Snow swirling across the valley floor, the crack of rifles echoing between the cliffs, the smell of cordite and cold metal in the air. And the moment my finger hesitated on the trigger, my knees nearly buckled as the past crashed into the present. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself, my breathing suddenly shallow as the room tilted slightly around me. 2 years vanished in an instant. I was back in that valley again, watching the ridges, searching for the muzzle flash. trying to find the shooter before it was too late, but this time the memory didn't stop where it used to, because the radio was still alive, still screaming, still filled with the voices of soldiers fighting for their lives. Another burst of gunfire tore through the transmission. Then a voice broke through the chaos. "Mercer, they've got the ridge locked down." It was Asterisk Specialist Elena Cruz. Her voice carried the tension of someone trying to stay calm while everything around them fell apart. I could hear wind roaring across the microphone and the sharp echo of bullets striking stone. Somewhere out there in that valley, my team was pinned beneath enemy fire. I pressed closer to the radio, listening carefully. Mercer answered immediately, his voice tight but controlled. "Hold positions. Watch the northern ridge." Another rifle burst snapped across the channel. Then someone shouted, "They're flanking the choke point." My heart started pounding harder. I knew exactly where they were. The choke point. The narrow bend halfway through Black Ridge where the valley tightened between two jagged rock formations. The worst place on the entire route. A perfect trap. The enemy had waited until the patrol reached that exact position before opening fire. That meant the shooters had already studied the terrain. They knew exactly where our soldiers would be forced to move. And they had taken the high ground before the patrol ever entered the valley. I closed my eyes for a moment, mapping the battlefield in my mind. Eastern Ridge, Northern Shelf, rock formation above the choke point, three dominant firing positions, three angles controlling the valley floor, the same positions, the same deadly geometry, the same trap. My breathing slowed as another realization crept into my thoughts. Commander Whitaker knew this terrain too. She had studied the same maps, walked the same ridges, analyzed the same ambush reports from 2 years earlier, and suddenly something inside my mind shifted. She hadn't removed me from the mission because she didn't trust my rifle. She had removed me because she understood something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. The valley itself was my weakness. Inside that corridor, surrounded by those ridges, the memories would come back the same way they had before. The snow, the muzzle flash, the half-second hesitation, the fear of making the wrong shot again. Down there in the valley, the past would always have control. But from above it, everything was different. From the ridge lines, the battlefield became clear. Angles made sense, movement slowed. The chaos of the valley turned into patterns a sniper could read. And suddenly I understood exactly what Commander Whitaker had done. She hadn't taken me out of the fight. She had moved the fight somewhere else. Another shout burst through the radio. "Mercer, we can't move!" Gunfire cracked again. "Jennings is losing blood." My eyes snapped open. There was no more time to stand in this room listening to the battle unfold through a speaker. The ridges overlooking Black Ridge were still within range of the base. Not the same observation point planned for the mission, but another one. Higher, farther away, harder to reach, but still close enough for a sniper who knew the terrain. And suddenly my body was already moving. The doubt that had lived in my chest for 2 years didn't disappear, but something stronger rose above it. Determination, because my team was still alive out there. And the enemy on those ridges had made one critical mistake. They thought the patrol entered that valley without a sniper. Without another word, I reached for my rifle. The cold metal of the weapon felt familiar in my hands. The weight settled against my shoulder like it had 1,000 times before. I checked the scope, loaded a fresh magazine, and turned toward the door. If the enemy believed they controlled the high ground, they were about to learn they weren't alone up there. Observation Post Echo sat high above the valley, carved into the side of a jagged ridgeline nearly 800 meters above the floor of Black Ridge Corridor. Getting there was never easy. In winter, it was brutal. The climb started just beyond the outer perimeter of the base where the mountain face rose sharply into broken rock and frozen ledges. Wind howled across the slopes with enough force to shove a soldier sideways if they lost their footing. Snow had collected in uneven patches across the climb, hiding slick layers of ice underneath. But none of that mattered. Not now. My boots slammed into the first ridge path as I moved quickly but carefully, my rifle strapped tight against my chest. Every step had to be deliberate. One mistake on a slope like this could send a soldier sliding 50 feet down sharp stone. Below me, the valley stretched silent and distant, but through the radio clipped to my vest, the battle was anything but quiet. Gunfire snapped through the speakers in sharp bursts. "Mercer, they're pushing the North Ridge. Hold that position. We're pinned." Every shout drove my legs harder against the mountain. The climb grew steeper the higher I went. The wind struck my face like frozen knives, carrying sharp grains of snow that stung my skin and blurred my vision. I leaned forward against it, gripping the rock as I pulled myself across narrow ledges and uneven stone. The entire time, the sounds of the firefight continued in my ear. Someone yelled coordinates. Another voice called for suppressive fire. The medic shouted for more pressure on a wound. And beneath all of it, the steady crack of rifles echoing through the mountains. The enemy still held the ridges, still controlled the valley, still believed they had trapped 12 soldiers below them. But that was about to change. After 20 exhausting minutes of climbing, the ridgeline finally opened ahead of me. Observation Post Echo. It wasn't much more than a narrow shelf of rock overlooking the valley, barely large enough for a single sniper to lie prone with a rifle. The wind whipped across the exposed ledge violently, rattling loose snow and sending small stones skittering down the slope. From here, the view of Black Ridge Corridor was almost perfect. The valley floor stretched out nearly 800 meters below, winding between the cliffs like a frozen river of white. The patrol was somewhere inside that corridor now, hidden among rocks and ridges as they fought to survive. But the real targets weren't down there. They were above. I dropped to one knee and unstrapped my rifle, the metal already cold enough to bite through my gloves. Slowly, I crawled forward until the edge of the ridge came into view beneath my scope. And then I saw the battlefield. The moment the valley came into focus through the glass, everything inside my mind shifted. The chaos I had been hearing through the radio suddenly transformed into something clear, ordered, understandable. This was the difference between fighting inside the valley and watching it from above. From the ground, soldiers saw fragments of the battlefield muzzle flashes, shadows between rocks, pieces of movement that never formed a complete picture. But from the ridge, the entire fight revealed itself. I could see the patrol's position along the valley floor, their shapes tucked behind scattered rock formations while rounds struck the snow around them. Sergeant First Class Mercer was coordinating their fire, moving soldiers from cover to cover as they tried to escape the choke point. Above them, 3 separate ridge lines overlooked the valley, and on those ridges, movement, enemy shooters. Exactly where I expected them to be. One crouched behind a jagged outcrop on the eastern ridge, firing down into the patrol's flank. Another moved between 2 snow-covered boulders farther north, using the terrain to shift positions while keeping the valley floor pinned, and somewhere above the choke point itself, another rifle fired from behind a fallen tree. 3 shooters, 3 angles, the same deadly triangle of fire I remembered from 2 years earlier. For a brief moment, the memory tried to return. The hesitation, the fear, the thought that I might fail again. But something about this position changed everything. Up here, the valley didn't feel like a trap anymore. It looked like a map. Lines of sight, angles of elevation, wind direction, distance calculations. The same instincts that had been buried under 2 years of doubt came rushing back with perfect clarity. For the first time in a long time, my hands felt steady. I lay flat against the rock, adjusting the bipod of my rifle as the wind whipped across the ridge. The barrel settled against the stone, pointing down toward the eastern ridgeline, 800 meters. Extreme distance, strong crosswind. Most snipers would refuse to take that shot, not because it was impossible, because the conditions made it unpredictable. But I had spent my entire career training for moments exactly like this. Slowly, I settled behind the rifle. The world narrowed until only the scope remained. Breath in, breath out. My finger rested lightly against the trigger. The enemy shooter on the eastern ridge moved again, leaning out from behind his rock to fire another burst down into the valley. He still had no idea someone was watching him. For the first time in 2 years, the noise of the battlefield faded away. The memories fell silent. The doubt disappeared. I wasn't inside the chaos anymore. I was above it. I adjusted my scope slightly, letting the wind drift calculations settle into place. And then I began hunting. The first enemy sniper appeared exactly where I expected him to be. Through the scope, the eastern ridge sharpened into perfect detail. Snow clung to the rocks like frozen dust, and the wind pushed thin streams of white powder across the jagged edge of the cliff. Then I saw him, a shadow shifting behind a broken rock formation overlooking the choke point of the valley. He had chosen the position perfectly. From that height, he could see nearly the entire corridor. Every soldier moving below was exposed to him, every piece of cover mapped in his sight line, which meant one thing. He wasn't just another rifleman in the ambush. He was controlling it. Every time my team tried to move, he fired. Every time Mercer shifted positions, another burst of rounds slammed into the rocks around them. The enemy shooters on the other ridges were following his lead, adjusting their fire as he forced the patrol into tighter and tighter cover. Take him out, and the entire ambush would begin to unravel. I centered the crosshair on the rock edge where his rifle barrel appeared between bursts. Then I paused. This was not an easy shot. I studied the terrain through the scope, letting my breathing slow as the details came into focus. Distance, 812 meters. Elevation dropped from my position to the valley ridge. Wind pushing hard across the mountain from west to east, strong enough to move a bullet several inches over that distance. I watched the snow drifting through the air, measuring its speed as it crossed the valley. Every sniper learns to read the wind. But in mountains like this, the wind doesn't behave the way it does on flat ground. It curls around cliffs, dives through valleys, and shifts direction without warning, which meant the shot had to be perfect. Below me, another burst of gunfire exploded through the radio clipped to my vest. Mercer, we're taking fire from the East Ridge again. A soldier shouted something I couldn't fully hear. Then Mercer's voice cut through the chaos. Hold your positions. The enemy sniper leaned out again. Just for a second. But it was enough. Through the scope, I could see his entire firing position now. His rifle rested across the rock, muzzle flashing as he fired another shot toward the patrol below. He still had no idea anyone was watching him. From his perspective, the valley belonged to him. The patrol was trapped. The high ground was his. The ambush was working exactly as planned. My breathing slowed even further. Inhale. Exhale. The rifle settled deeper into the rock beneath me, the bipod gripping the surface as the wind whipped across the ridge. I adjusted the scope slightly, compensating for the crosswind. A small correction to the left, another adjustment for elevation. The crosshair hovered over the rock edge where the sniper's head would appear when he leaned out again. Seconds passed. The world narrowed to the scope. The mountains disappeared. The wind faded. Even the gunfire below became distant. All that existed now was distance, wind, and timing. The enemy sniper shifted again. I saw the movement before he fully exposed himself. A shoulder, then the top of his helmet. He leaned out to fire. In that exact moment, 2 years of doubt tried to whisper in the back of my mind. The memory of hesitation, the half second that had changed everything. But this time, something inside me was different. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, only calm, only focus, only the simple math of the shot. 812 meters, wind drifting right, elevation drop calculated. My finger rested gently against the trigger. I exhaled slowly and squeezed. The rifle thundered against my shoulder, the recoil pushing into the rock beneath me as the shot echoed across the mountains. For a split second, the bullet vanished into the distance. Then, through the scope, I saw the impact. The enemy sniper collapsed instantly behind the rock, his rifle slipping from his hands as his body dropped out of view. The eastern ridge fell silent. Down in the valley, Mercer's voice exploded through the radio. "Shooter down! East Ridge shooter is down!" For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy had lost control of the battlefield. But the fight wasn't over, because 2 more shooters were still waiting on the ridges above my team. And now they knew someone was hunting them. The shot echoed across the mountains like a crack of thunder. For a fraction of a second, nothing moved. Then the enemy sniper on the eastern ridge collapsed backward, his rifle slipping from the rock as his body disappeared behind the ledge. The silence lasted less than a heartbeat. Then the entire battlefield changed. Below me, Mercer's voice burst through the radio. "East Ridge shooter is down. I stayed behind the scope, scanning the surrounding ridge lines. One threat eliminated, two more still hunting. The enemy fighters had expected complete control of the high ground. Losing their primary sniper shattered the rhythm of their ambush. For the first time since the shooting began, their fire slowed as they tried to understand what had just happened. That moment of confusion was all my team needed. "Mercer," I said calmly into the radio, my voice steady despite the wind whipping across the ridge. "Move your team 10 meters left. There's a rock wall that will shield you from the northern shooter." For a second there was silence. Then Mercer answered, disbelief clear in his voice. "Carter." I didn't respond to the surprise. 10 meters left," I repeated. "Move now." Below me, the patrol shifted quickly, sliding across the frozen ground toward the rocks I had identified. Almost instantly, the angle of enemy fire changed as bullets struck the stone instead of open snow. They had cover now, which meant I could work. I adjusted my scope slightly, scanning the northern ridgeline. Wind carried loose snow across the slope, making it harder to spot movement, but I knew where the second shooter had to be. A cluster of boulders halfway up the ridge. Perfect concealment. Perfect angle there. A flicker of movement between two rocks. The enemy rifle appeared first. Then the shooter leaned forward to track the patrol below. He still thought the eastern sniper was covering the valley. He had no idea he was alone now. I steadied my breathing again. Distance slightly shorter this time. 740 meters. Wind is still pushing across the valley. I adjusted the crosshair, exhaled, and fired. The second shot cracked across the ridge. Through the scope, I saw the impact instantly. The northern shooter jerked backward and disappeared between the rocks. Another voice erupted through the radio. "Second shooter down." But the third enemy rifle opened fire immediately, rounds snapping across the valley floor as the remaining hostile tried to pin the patrol before they could escape. I already knew where he was. The fallen tree above the choke point, a natural firing rest that overlooked the entire valley floor. I shifted the rifle again, sliding the scope across the ridgeline until the broken trunk filled the glass. For several seconds, nothing moved. The shooter had realized something was wrong. He was hiding now, waiting, trying to locate whoever had just eliminated his teammates. The wind howled across the ridge, tugging at my jacket and rattling loose snow against the rock beneath me. Down in the valley, Mercer's voice returned. "We're still pinned on the west side." "I see him," I answered quietly. My eye remained fixed to the scope. Patience is the sniper's greatest weapon. Seconds stretched longer. The valley held its breath. Then, finally, the enemy made his mistake. The rifle barrel slid out from behind the fallen tree. Just a few inches. Enough to take a shot. Enough for me to see him. The crosshair settled exactly where the trunk ended and the shooter's shoulder appeared. Wind correction. Breath control. Trigger pressure. The rifle thundered again. The bullet struck with brutal precision. Through the scope, I saw the enemy collapse against the tree, his weapon dropping into the snow. And just like that, the valley fell quiet. No more muzzle flashes. No more gunfire echoing between the cliffs. Only wind sweeping across the mountains and the faint crackle of the radio. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mercer's voice returned, filled with disbelief and relief. "All shooters down." Below me, the patrol slowly rose from cover. One soldier helped Jennings stand, the medic keeping pressure on his wound as the team regrouped along the valley floor. They began moving again, carefully at first, then faster as they cleared the choke point and pushed toward the far end of the corridor. I watched through the scope as all 12 soldiers disappeared beyond the final ridge. Alive. Every single one of them. The ambush that should have destroyed the patrol had collapsed in minutes, not because the valley had changed, but because someone had taken back the high ground. I finally lifted my eye from the scope and let out a slow breath. For the first time in 2 years, the weight inside my chest felt lighter. The valley that once haunted me had just witnessed something different. Not hesitation, not failure. This time the sniper fired first. Later that night, the base had finally gone quiet. The wind still moved across the mountains outside, brushing against the walls of the armory with a low, steady hum. But inside the room, everything felt still. Most of the soldiers were asleep after the long day, their gear stacked beside bunks, rifles cleaned and locked away, but I couldn't sleep. I sat alone on a wooden bench inside the armory, the overhead light casting a pale glow across the metal racks of weapons along the walls. My rifle rested across my knees, the barrel angled toward the concrete floor. I had already cleaned it twice, though it didn't need it. Some habits are hard to break. My hands moved slowly across the rifle's surface, checking the bolt one more time, wiping away invisible dust that wasn't really there. The cold metal felt familiar beneath my fingers, steady and dependable in a way the world rarely was. For a long time, I simply sat there, listening to the quiet, trying to process what had happened in the valley. 12 soldiers had walked into an ambush that should have ended very differently, and yet every one of them had walked back through the gate alive. The armory door creaked softly behind me. I didn't turn right away. Boots crossed the floor slowly. Then someone stopped beside the bench. Commander Asterisk, Captain Laura Whitaker asked. She didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. For a while we simply sat there in the quiet armory, the only sound the faint whistle of wind outside the walls. Finally, Whitaker spoke. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I read your journal. My hand stopped moving. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked at her. The words caught me off guard more than any ambush ever had. That notebook had never been meant for anyone else's eyes. It lived at the bottom of my gear case, hidden beneath spare ammunition and cleaning kits. Inside it were range notes, mission sketches, small reminders about wind patterns and shooting positions. And between those pages, the things I never said out loud. Whitaker rested her elbows on her knees, her gaze fixed somewhere on the floor ahead of us. Weeks ago, she continued quietly, I was reviewing your equipment inventory before the mission. I opened your case looking for your ballistic charts. She paused. That's when I saw the notebook. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. There was one line in that journal I remembered writing more clearly than anything else. A sentence that had lived in my mind ever since the day we lost those 3 soldiers. Whitaker spoke the words before I could. If I go back into that valley broken, I break everyone with me. Hearing it out loud felt heavier than I expected. For 2 years, I had carried those words inside my own head, believing they were a quiet truth I had to live with. Whitaker turned slightly, finally meeting my eyes. That's why I pulled you from the mission. I didn't say anything. She continued. You weren't afraid of the enemy in that valley, she said. You were afraid of yourself. The honesty of it landed harder than any accusation could have. For a long moment, neither of us spoke again. Then Whitaker leaned back slightly against the bench. We didn't need another fight inside that corridor, she said. Not with those memories still sitting in the same place where they started. She nodded toward the rifle resting across my knees. You needed a different battlefield. The words settled slowly in my mind. A different battlefield. Up on that ridge earlier that day, something inside me had changed. The memories hadn't disappeared. The valley still held the ghosts of what happened there 2 years ago. But when I looked through that scope from above the fight, the past didn't control me anymore. I had taken the shot. Not second. First. For the first time in 2 years, the tight weight that had lived in my chest finally loosened. I let out a slow breath. That valley took a lot from me, I said quietly. Whitaker nodded. War usually does. Another moment of silence passed between us. Then she added something that stayed with me long after that night. Scars don't mean you're broken, Carter, she said. They mean you survived long enough to keep fighting. I looked down at the rifle again, the metal reflecting the dim light of the armory. That day in Black Ridge Corridor had started with doubt, with fear, with the belief that I might never trust myself on a battlefield again. But it ended differently. 12 soldiers walked out of that valley alive, and somewhere between the ridge and the trigger pull, I realized something important. War may leave scars, but it doesn't get to decide who we become afterward. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?